Do so.
Nice to meet you again.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to find.
They made it hard for you.
Yeah, man.
To be honest, like we were very specific about the movies.
Just go ahead and get started. I think we start talking, people will sit down.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe one day a day.
Just waiting for a critical mass of people, I think. So I'm just going to use my voice because there's not that many people. Can I give that to you?
You can.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. Okay, guys, is anyone here for the deep dive session? Deep brunch? Yeah? If you are, do you want to come closer? And we'll...
Okay.
Yeah?
Come closer so we can just have a gathering here.
To get you a megaphone.
Yeah. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Pete from Deep Branch Biotechnology. Our mission is to transform the producers of today, well, who make things that are traditionally made in an unsustainable manner, and transform them from polluters into producers. So, just like discussed before, we take carbon dioxide and we turn it into sustainable protein. And I kind of want to demystify this process a bit. It's not magic. So I'm going to take us back in time and go from there. So if we think about 14 billion years ago, the Big Bang happened. Then, unless you're a cosmologist, nothing really interesting happened until about 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth was formed. 500 million years later, we had life. So if you looked at the surface of the Earth, it might look quite inhospitable. There'd be no free oxygen, no ozone layer, lots of UV, impossible to live. But if you go deep down to the bottom of the oceans, you would find the beginnings of life. Now, there's some debate as to how this life started in a cellular form, but what we do know is, in terms of metabolism, it's likely that they were able to utilize carbon dioxide as a carbon source, so the building block of the molecules of life, and hydrogen as an energy source. Now, as time went on, these cells evolved, and I think one of the most important things that happened is they took this ability to utilize hydrogen, which was coming from the hydrothermal vents, but they actually used this and took it on the road with them. So photosynthesis evolved. Cyanobacteria, microalgae, these things were able to utilize the energy from the sunlight, split water, and then from there generate their own hydrogen. So they were no longer limited to the hydrothermal vents. Life could spread over Earth, and then eventually you had the point whereby lots of oxygen was made. Metabolism was no longer limited by the fact that oxygen wasn't around. You had mitochondria, the powerhouses of life, and life became multicellular. And from there, plants invaded the land. They developed branches, leaves, competed for sunlight with each other, and life really blossomed. So you get to the point about, a billion years ago where you had the Cambrian explosion. So at this point, life really became weird and wonderful. All sorts of different kinds of animals arrived, all sorts of different kinds of plants, and they were able to metabolize things in lots of different ways. So at this point, life was really beginning to expand, but it wasn't until sexual reproduction came along that we had a lot more diversity. So at this point, and this is where it becomes interesting, plants started generating seeds and flowers. And about 100 million years ago, the bee came along, the first fossil records of that, and we started to have pollination of things. Fast forward 10 million years, we had grasslands, savanna, the precursors to what would today be agricultural land. Filled with this, you had cereal. So these cereals went on to become, well, they got bred to become the maize, wheat, but of course they all start from grass. And where it starts to become really interesting is about 10,000 years ago. So this is when we first get agriculture, civilization happens. We can focus our efforts away from hunter-gathering and more towards building cities, towards developing mathematics, architecture. Civilization is improving. And about 1,000 years ago, soy came on the scene. So in China, they started cultivating soy. Obviously, it shaped the regional cuisine a lot, but it also changed the face of agriculture. At that point, we were able to use our land to generate a lot of protein. Fast forward 100 years, and we've got what began as the Green Revolution. So we applied engineering principles in the 50s or so, but before then a bit too, and we started breeding our plants in a different way. Our wheat, we lowered the amount of energy required to make tall stalks, halve the stalk size, all that energy goes into grain. We have more grain production, more grain per square meter of land. And modern agriculture kind of took this application and ran with it with regards to animals. So we had chickens that diverged into layers for egg production, broilers for meat production. But this is where things kind of started to go wrong, in my opinion. We took the same application, we took the same principles where we improved yields of our plants to meat, but we took them too far. So for broilers, for instance, these chickens that make meat, it's got to the stage today whereby sometimes they put on meat so quickly, they have so much body mass that their skeletal system can't support their legs, and their legs buckle from underneath them. With the layers, you have the problem that they are so good at putting all the energy they consume into their eggs, the males have got no economic value because they don't put any weight on no matter how much you feed them, so they get killed on their first day of life. And this is just the ethical problems that we have with our food production right now, our major protein sources. It doesn't even speak to, it doesn't really speak to our issues with regards to sustainability. So we heard here 14% of fossil fuel, 14% of our carbon footprint comes from the land, comes from the animals that we produce. So, it's a bit of an issue that we have here with agriculture that, I'm going to borrow a term here from microbiology. Are you familiar with dysbiosis? So it's the opposite of symbiosis. We're not living in balance with our surroundings, and I think this is a real issue that we have to try and face. So land use is in deep competition between feed, food, and fuel. And with a growing population that's not only going to be eating more per person, of course, eating more as a planet, but it's not just food, it's our infrastructure, our housing, our buildings. All these things are going to increase our CO2 output unless we drastically change what we do. So, it's not all doom and gloom. We can take some efforts to try and optimize this process. So that's what most people here are going to do. We're talking about this existing state where we have the sun providing energy. So soy is able to utilize that, grow. We take the soy protein, we feed it to our animals, and we eat them. Some people might say, okay, well, why don't we just cut out the animals altogether? Great, we have soy-based foods. But if you're going to take a true top-down optimization approach, why not look at the way you're producing the soy and say, do we really need to use arable land to do that? Why don't we use something like aquaponics, aeroponics, so the roots don't need to sit in soil anymore, they just get the nutrients directly. But why not take it one step further? Why do you even need roots? Why do you need these complex structures? Why not just go back to those cyanobacteria, those algae, and use the sunlight directly and make protein from there? What we say is, why do you even need photosynthesis? Why not take CO2, which is available in spades from multiple different industries, combine it with hydrogen, grow the bacteria that were first around when life happened, and use them to produce our protein? And that's exactly what we do at Deep Branch Biotechnology. So we've taken this process and we've really stripped it down to bare minimum. And of course, when you think about engineering, process optimization, you can do this top-down optimization, but you can also go bottom-up. And if you're going bottom-up, it's always good to start with a simple process. So with a simple process, you can then build on in a modular fashion, iteratively, and look at how you can improve it. And through that, we do synthetic biology. So we have this chassis that we work on. About 10 years ago, has anyone heard of CRISPR? Yeah? CRISPR-based genome editing. So about 10 years ago, it was first figured out that bacteria had this ability to protect themselves from the viruses that infect them. And some clever person said, well, what if we change their ability to cut that DNA and cut any DNA? So now we have genome editing bacteria, genome edited eukaryotic cells. Babies in China purportedly being genome edited. So this technology is extremely powerful, and we're saying, why not use this in a good way? The problem with synthetic biology in any system is always the complexity of the system. It's extremely difficult for anyone to do metabolic engineering of any meaningful scale, even with the most simple organisms. So we see this a lot in trying to do biochemical manufacturing of compounds that are traditionally derived from fossil fuels. So I used to work in close collaboration during my PhD with LanzaTech. LanzaTech are a company that convert steel mill off-gas into biofuels. And the bacteria that use to do this are extremely good at producing ethanol. But I spent a long time banging my head against the wall trying to get them to produce more high-value chemicals that we traditionally get from petrochemicals. And the reason behind this is metabolic complexity. But if you have an organism that's extremely simple, that evolved to do the bare minimum of life, and you know what 90% of the genes in that organism do, it's a lot easier to delete existing ones, to insert new ones, and to drive production of what is essentially protein into something that's a lot more high value. So when we talk about feed, when we talk about food, proteins aren't the only components that people are interested in eating, right? You have different nutrients, fats, you have secondary metabolites that could have real nutritional value, so vitamins. And if we can produce these in a more sustainable manner, it means that feed producers have to pay less to put in these components. But more importantly, if we're going for a food application, it means that it's a hell of a lot more sustainable, but also a lot more nutritious than other single-cell proteins. So that's really the approach that we come at it with at Deep Branch Biotechnology. We have a really good platform process, and we like to partner with industries that have a lot of CO2 output. So we're not just using our technology to create a more sustainable protein, we're also using it to have a secondary impact on the world, which is the reduction of CO2 in industries that are fundamentally committed to doing so. So I guess everyone's familiar with cement production, right? So what you might not realize is that the carbon output from cement production, only about half of that comes from burning fuels. So when you produce cement, you have to burn a lot of fuel, heat kilns up, and in these kilns you have limestone which gets converted into quicklime. When this conversion process happens, it produces a lot of CO2. The upshot of this, how do you make the process more sustainable? You use biofuel, right? Well, you're only solving half the problem. The other half is that CO2 is always going to come out. And is anyone familiar with the program Grand Designs? Architecture TV program? If you speak to any architect, yeah? Yeah. So when you're watching this and they say, we've got this lovely site, nice green field, and we're going to produce a really nice sustainable building, what do they say? Any ideas? Any idea on concrete, cement? They might say,
Let's make it out of wood.
yeah, precisely. Let's put on a green roof. Let's make it out of wood. Let's use materials that are more sustainable. And what they'll always say is we'll minimize the use of concrete and cement because it has such a huge impact on the environment. But from an architectural standpoint, that really limits what you can build. You know, they're great materials to build all the buildings that we see around us here today. And if you offer architects the option to use these materials that are produced in a green fashion, you know, they'll bite your hand off. So we're having a paid pilot soon with the UK's biggest cement manufacturer. And a lot of the reason that we've got this is that we spoke to their customers, we spoke to the architects and said, would you be willing to pay more for sustainable cement, sustainable concrete? And they said, yeah, of course. And on the other end of things, we have animal feed producers who see that the way in which the food protein that we eat is unsustainable, but they have customers that want to eat meat still. So we're very pragmatic about this, and we come in and we say, look, we'll make your meat production more efficient, we'll make it more sustainable, and we'll get people familiar with the idea that single-cell protein is nutritious, and then use that as a platform to then go into human food production. And that's basically a summary of what we do at Deep Branch, of where we're standing in terms of, sorry.
So I have a question. Do you need to remove the oxygen?
No, it's an aerobic process. Yeah.
You're adding hydrogen, right?
Yeah.
And then you have oxygen.
Yeah.
That's a nice combination.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So our fermentation process revolves around the use of hydrogen and oxygen. These have an explosive limit. If there's too much of both of them, they'll explode. Actually, the name of the kind of bacteria that we use is Nalgas bacteria, which is, are there any German speakers here? Okay, so if I mistranslate it, they won't tell me I'm wrong, but it basically means like boom bacteria. So yeah, so this process can be extremely explosive, but Of course, we borrow a lot from industries whereby, natural gas production, oil refineries, these guys all deal with potentially explosive things on a daily basis, and the chemical engineering is there so we can do it at scale.
My
Hey.
name is Elaine.
Hey.
Just wonder, what about the price point?
The price point.
Because your primarily your product, the single cell protein, is going to the feed industry, right?
That's
and
right.
You're also developing for human consumption as well.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so it's both. Then, what about because if it's for human consumption, the price level could be higher, I guess.
Yeah,
than
precisely.
For the feed, how do you manage that?
Well, so a lot of this is tied to energy costs. So hydrogen production is going to be our major operational expenditure. But according to our model, we can, in Europe, we could generate it and sell it at a profit anywhere between $800 and $1,400 per kilogram. Sorry, per ton, not kilogram. Any other questions?
It's sort of a chemistry question.
Yeah.
I've heard now twice making protein from CO2.
Yeah.
When I think of protein, there's nitrogen in there,
Yeah.
some of the amino acids have sulfur. How are you getting, so the chemistry is not
Yeah.
computing for that.
No, precisely. So we provide inorganic nitrogen. Inorganic nitrogen is the source. But if you think about protein, it's still mainly carbon. And there are a handful of minerals that we need to provide for our process. But in terms of main inputs, it's hydrogen, CO2, and inorganic nitrogen sources, which, as Patty said, we can generate from the air, or we can provide things like ammonium nitrate we can use as a nitrate source. Yeah.
So I have two questions. What scale are you at? And,
Yeah.
what do you use the technology for? Better yield, better amino acids?
Yeah. So, sorry, that was two questions. First question was scale. Second question was what do we use synthetic biology for? So in terms of scale, we're currently lab scale, so that's 5 to 10 litre. We're looking to scale up to 100 litres within the next year. And in terms of synthetic biology, at the moment, we have a non-GMO microbe. We view that as being extremely important to get our first product to market. Market acceptance where I'm from in the UK is very very against GMO in general. But we think that's changing, so we actually conducted a consumer survey. We said, how comfortable would you be eating a food that was generated through genome editing? And about 80% of the people we asked 300 people, about 80% said they would be comfortable. But the crucial thing on that when we interviewed them was that as long as it was done with the right intentions in mind, so if it was done for improved nutrition, that's a good thing. And I think that's something we need to communicate clearly. Yeah, precisely.
In Europe, these genome edited microbes now are considered GMO, right?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. But not here.
Not here.
Not here. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for your time. Feel free to come grab me if you want me to explain anything else, or if you think there'd be good synergy.